set a red line, he called it off, and nothing has been agreed to?
Well, they've agreed to negotiate, and the one thing that he specifically mentioned was that Iran said they were going to open the strait, and this whole negotiation, this whole ceasefire is based on their willingness to do that. But they have a baseline for negotiations, so I guess there's going to be a 2-week period here where we find out if we can have a diplomatic solution.
I
think the agreement is to open it and then to talk about the rest of it.
Well, the Strait was not even an issue at the start of this war. The Strait was open, and now that becomes the closing of the Strait was a result of this war, and now that becomes the key to renegotiating with the Iranians. How did that become the key issue? That was never the key issue before the war began.
In today's video, Bobby Ghosh takes on Scott Jennings on Newsnight with Abby Phillip as tensions rise over high-stakes US-Iran negotiations, controversial demands involving the Strait of Hormuz, and growing confusion around the administration's strategy. As Scott Jennings tries to defend the shifting narrative, Bobby Ghosh pushes back hard, calling out inconsistencies, questioning the lack of a clear long-term plan, and highlighting the global economic consequences of these decisions. So let's dive in and watch how Bobby Ghosh shuts down Scott Jennings on Newsnight with Abby Phillip.
All the things that you're saying were true yesterday, throughout the entire day yesterday. So why move the goalposts tonight, just hours before his deadline?
Well, I agree with some of what was said there. We don't really know what's in the 10 points. We haven't seen it. We also don't know what conversations have been had with a lot of other countries. There's a lot of reporting tonight that maybe China was involved, that maybe other countries got engaged here in mediating this. So there's obviously a lot of players in the room having conversations that we're simply not privy to. So I think we're all probably going to be watching over the next 2 weeks to see how the negotiations turn out. What I'm most interested in is what happens to the nuclear program of Iran. To me, that was the biggest piece of why we were doing this. The president drew a red line. They will never get a nuclear weapon. That's why we were doing this, along with taking away their ability to export terror, the missile program, the aggressive Navy. But to me, that's the number one piece. When are we going to see the negotiating points around the development of nuclear weapons? And we'll find that out, I guess, in the coming days.
No mention of that. Trump, by the way, and we shouldn't gloss over this, he started the morning with the threat of ending Iran's civilization and ended the day without any clarity on any of the things that Scott just pointed out, and especially the thing that presumptively we went into this war to get control over, which is the nuclear program.
Pretty insane jump, right? From destroying civilization to seemingly using their 10-point maximalist plan as a baseline, right? And those are the kind of, just to your point, I really want to understand exactly what's been agreed to behind the scenes here. And if tolling is what's been agreed to, allowing Iran to actually charge a toll for ships to pass through, that would be actually a step backward for our country and for global passage of 20% of the world's oil and gas. That's a huge problem. And you add to that, and I'd like to really understand where we are on the uranium side, and I think the nuclear piece is very, very important. Where are we on the terror program, what's been agreed to there, and of course, what's happened on the ballistic side, and kind of what progress have we made, and I think that's a very important thing to understand. Well, hopefully we'll hear from the president.
I don't think anything's been agreed to, by the way, other than...
So then why did the goalposts move? Why did he call off he set a red line, he called it off, and nothing has been agreed to?
Well, they've agreed to negotiate, and the one thing that he specifically mentioned was that Iran said they were going to open the strait, and this whole negotiation, this whole ceasefire is based on their willingness to do that. But they have a baseline for negotiations, so I guess there's going to be a 2-week period here where we find out if we can have a diplomatic solution.
I
think the agreement is to open it and then to talk about the rest of it.
Well, the Strait was not even an issue at the start of this war. The Strait was open, and now that becomes the closing of the Strait was a result of this war, and now that becomes the key to renegotiating with the Iranians. How did that become the key issue? That was never the key issue before the war began.
What really stands out here is how unclear the overall strategy looks when you compare the shifting goals over such a short period of time. If the original focus was preventing nuclear capability, then suddenly pivoting toward issues like reopening the Strait of Hormuz shows how reactive the situation has become. And that matters because historically, when objectives in a conflict start changing midstream, it usually signals a lack of long-term planning. The nuclear issue alone isn't something you can sidestep. It's been the central concern for decades, and without a clear framework for inspections, enrichment limits, and enforcement, any progress ends up being temporary. Another important layer here is the global impact, especially when it comes to energy markets. The Strait of Hormuz handles roughly 20% of the world's oil supply, so even the threat of disruption can spike prices and affect economies far beyond the region. We've already seen how quickly markets react to instability there, and once a country demonstrates it can influence that choke point, it changes the balance of leverage. That's not just a regional issue anymore. It becomes a global economic pressure point, and entering negotiations after that kind of escalation puts others at a disadvantage. Then there's the credibility factor, which is just as critical as any military or economic leverage. When messaging shifts from extreme threats to openness for negotiation within hours, it creates confusion about the actual position. Allies need consistency to coordinate effectively, and adversaries look for those gaps to gain an edge. Over time, that inconsistency can weaken negotiating power instead of strengthening it.
We've now showed the Iranians, and they in turn have showed the rest of the world, that they have the ability to put their hands on the neck of the global economy. And once that has been seen, it can't be unseen. Once that, insert your cliche here.
You don't think they realized
they had never done it in all these years?
You don't think they knew it was sitting there?
And it's a big difference between knowing it and demonstrating it now. Everybody in the world knows it. Trillions of dollars of the global economy depend on it. It's not enough to say that it was always going to be this way. It was not going to be this way on the 27th of last month. It's become this way because of this war.
But to me, this is still secondary.
And just to be clear,
this is still secondary to the
this
nuclear issue, in my
two-week period in which there will be presumptively a stop to the bombing, Iran says that their military is going to control the Strait of Hormuz. So they are still going to use, to your point, the threat of force to allow whoever they want to come through that passage.
When was the last time we discussed the Iranians using military force to patrol the Strait of Hormuz? That was not on the table, to your point, before Donald Trump decided to do this. And of course, reporting is coming out about all of the myriad of reasons why he shouldn't have done this and how he was warned not to do this. And then there were those who, this is what happens when you don't have people who are experts, who are adults in the room making these decisions, unfortunately. This is what happens. They didn't anticipate this part. They went, wait a minute. The Strait of Hormuz controls all of this rite of passage for oil, for petrochemicals. Oh my gosh, our farmers are now freaking out because before they were suffering from tariffs and going bankrupt. Now it's planting season and they can't get their fertilizer. And then, oh my gosh, oil is going through the roof per barrel. And the American people were paying $2.50 a gallon. Now they're paying $4.15, sometimes $7, depending on where you live, since Donald Trump did this. We need to ask a question. How is this making America great again? If it was all about the nuclear program, which I agree with you, Scott, on, that was something that was very important. We haven't heard anything about that. If it was all about the ballistic missile program, we haven't heard anything about that in weeks. If this has all been about the Strait of Hormuz because Donald Trump has created chaos and instability and upset our allies and almost broke up NATO over all of this, and you can't undo the damage that he's already done. We cannot just gloss over the fact that the President of the United States threatened genocide against a civilization because he threw a temper tantrum this morning because he wasn't getting his own way. There should be consequences for that kind of flippant language. That's not something we should just gloss over.
We'll get to that in the next block.
The entire situation shifted from a focused objective to something much broader and harder to control. Before all of this, the Strait of Hormuz wasn't the central issue. It was a background risk everyone understood but wasn't actively being tested. Now it's front and center, and that's a big deal. Once a country demonstrates it can disrupt a choke point that carries roughly a fifth of the world's oil supply, that changes global dynamics overnight. It's no longer just about regional conflict. It becomes a pressure point on the entire global economy. Then there's the credibility and alliance factor, which can't be ignored. NATO and other allied partnerships depend on coordination and trust, especially in high-stakes situations. When actions appear unpredictable or poorly communicated, it puts strain on those relationships. And once allies start second-guessing leadership decisions, it weakens collective strategy. At the same time, strong rhetoric without clear follow-through can create more instability rather than deterrence. In situations like this, consistency and planning matter just as much as strength, because without them, even justified concerns can spiral into unintended consequences. Another important angle here is the economic fallout, which people are already starting to feel. When oil prices spike, it doesn't just affect gas. It impacts transportation, food production, and even farming inputs like fertilizer. US farmers, for example, rely heavily on global supply chains for things like potash and nitrogen-based fertilizers, and disruptions in energy markets drive those costs up fast. We've seen this before. Energy instability creates a ripple effect that hits everyday people, not just governments. So when decisions lead to that kind of volatility, it raises serious questions about whether the risks were fully considered.
Forget what Scott's point was, though, here. And I agree with you. When we're talking about messaging, you cannot possibly argue right now it has changed from day to day to day to day. But let's just one time in our history, in our recent history, let's look at the long game for once. This is a country right now, one of the most evil nation states that has been on the planet. It has been severely degraded with respect to its nuclear capability. It has been severely degraded with respect to its missile capability. Its army has been severely degraded. When they talk about trying to keep the Strait of Hormuz, that we're going to keep it closed with their military, what navy? There is no Iranian
They're
navy
not keeping
anymore.
it closed with their navy. That's
I
not
don't
what they're
have to- let's
using.
for once look at the long game here. We have made
but Chris-
that region. We've made this
But hold on,
place
Chris.
a safer
The thing
place.
that counters
Yes.
Ask,
No
the
such
Gulf,
thing.
ask
We
our
have.
Gulf
But Chris,
allies
the
if
thing
it's
that
safer.
counters
Yes, we
your
have.
point is that the Strait of Hormuz, right now, as we speak, is closed.
It is.
So if you're saying that all the things that we have done, they have no power to close the strait, then why is it closed?
We are talking about a very temporary situation right now. To
Okay,
think that this
well,
is going to continue forever,
5
really, Abby?
weeks-
I mean,
five-
honestly,
well,
we
hold
have
on.
the strongest
But-
military in the
but
entire
let me-
world.
but let's
we can
actually-
take that Strait of
But
Hormuz
let's
anytime
actually,
that
let's
we want.
That wasn't
actually
the, wait a minute, that wasn't the
contemplate what you're
original,
saying.
I
it wasn't
agree.
the original
I
mission.
agree. But I'm trying to look at the
But
long
Chris,
game.
5
here.
weeks
if we're
into
looking at the
this-
long game,
Chris, you have to
Chris,
understand.
hold on.
This is being argued. It's heads I win, tails you lose. That's how this is argued.
How about you? Hold on
I
a
missed
second.
that-
Hold on a
I missed
second.
that memo.
Hold on a second. How about you guys actually deal with reality?
Yes.
Five weeks into
what we're
this.
asking
Hold
you
on.
to do.
No. Let me just ask you a quick question. 5 weeks into this war, Iran's military has been decimated. Nobody disagrees with that.
True.
Okay, its navy decimated. All of that. 5 weeks into this war. First question: why is the Strait of Hormuz closed?
It's closed because they're choosing to harass people going through.
Okay.
With what navy? I thought they
Okay.
It's not the
thought it was
Navy. It's
So-
from the, it's
so,
from the
all
land.
right.
And
There's-
then-
there's
and
the
then-
point
and
then.
then
The
it's a
Navy being
temporary- it's a
decimated doesn't
temporary.
It's
matter.
closed. It's closed. You agree, and that Iran is keeping it closed.
And apparently
why
is opening pending this
the United
ceasefire.
States has threatened to use force to reopen it. We have not. Why have we not done it?
Well, the president asked international coalition to come in and deal with this, and 40 countries met about it last week at the direction of Great Britain.
He's also said we don't need them. He said we could do it ourselves. Why haven't we done it?
He also asked an international coalition to show up and deal with it.
You're not answering my
and they're doing
question.
it.
Why haven't we done it?
Because he wants other countries to take some responsibility for it.
Literally
Okay.
48 hours
So,
ago, he
look,
said he didn't care about the Straits. The
Long
Straits was
Long term, short term, however you look at it, Iran has successfully, from a point of profound weakness, been able to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed. And the reason that we are in this moment where the president is negotiating on their 10-point plan is because it is so important to him that that strait be reopened. And to Bobby's point, they have demonstrated to the world that they have economic leverage over the rest of the world.
That's right.
And so what does the United States do about that? That's the question that we are
Agree, but
facing
one thing
right
I
now.
The gap between what's being claimed and what's actually happening on the ground. You can talk about long-term wins all day, but if a key global shipping route like the Strait of Hormuz is still disrupted weeks into the conflict, that's a real-world problem that can't be brushed off. Around 20% of the world's oil passes through that choke point, and even short-term closures can spike prices and shake global markets. So even if Iran's traditional military capabilities have been weakened, the fact that they can still create that level of disruption shows they retain strategic leverage in ways that aren't purely about conventional strength. Another thing people tend to overlook is how modern conflicts don't rely solely on navies or air forces anymore. Iran has invested heavily in asymmetric tactics, things like small fast attack boats, mines, and drone capabilities that can threaten shipping without needing a dominant navy. We've seen similar strategies used in the past where weaker forces still manage to control or disrupt key areas. So the idea that capability equals control doesn't always hold up in practice, especially in narrow and heavily trafficked waterways like Hormuz. Then there's the coalition issue, which is just as important. If the situation were as straightforward as simply reopening the strait, it likely would have already happened. The fact that there's talk of involving multiple countries shows how complex and sensitive this has become. Allies don't just jump in without coordination, especially when escalation could impact global stability. And that brings it back to the bigger point. Success isn't just about degrading an opponent's military. It's about maintaining stability, protecting global interests, and having a clear plan for what comes next. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center, are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out ground news in the description down below.